Hey everyone, welcome to my live Facebook event. My name is Tess Miller and I'm a personal coach. I work with people who are loving what they're doing, but they have no idea where it's going. And I am here to talk to you today about what if thinking. What is what if thinking? What if thinking is when we are getting ready to do something big in our lives. And there's a lot of preparation that might go along with it, but also a whole lot of fear along with it. And we start thinking about all of the possible worst case scenarios that could happen with whatever big thing that we're preparing for. I imagine today, for example, is a big what if day for a lot of people, as it's election day, and there's a lot of what if this candidate wins over this candidate, and what if people get really intense in their emotions with how everything turns out, and what if we don't know for several days. So that's an example of what if thinking. But what if thinking can also lead to worst case scenario thinking. And what happens there is we start focusing on the worst case scenarios, and then all kinds of emotions start to bubble up about how would we feel about that worst case scenario? How would we deal with it? And of course, the natural thing is to start thinking about, well, how would I solve all of those problems? It's a way for us to feel a little bit of, safety in something that feels really uncertain and scary. And so we think of all of these, well, I could do this and I could do this and maybe, and it, again, we get invested in the worst case possibility and coming up with some solutions, but we forget about all of the other great things that could happen too. And what can happen is we close ourselves off from some solutions that we might think of in the spur of the moment if we are presented with a supposed worst case scenario. So today I want to talk about a process that I discovered for myself as I was leading up to a big event, and how this process really helped me deal with some of the challenging emotions that came up for me in that time. So for the past week or so, I'm just going to share a little story with you. For the past week or so, my child and I have been getting ready to come up to the family cottage. And our hopes were to just kind of get away for a couple of weeks, and we can do work and school from here, and it'll be in a beautiful environment, and it'll be a great way to get a change of scenery. But there's a lot that goes on with getting ready to come up to the family cottage. It's not just a matter of packing up the car, driving there, and then settling in and starting your stay. My family has a cottage on Mackinac Island, Michigan. And for those of you who don't know where that is, it's northern Michigan, kind of right underneath the Upper Peninsula, right next to the Mackinac Bridge. No, the bridge does not go to the island. A lot of people think it does, and it does not. But anyway, it is an island, which means you have to park your car on the mainland and hop on a ferry. They don't allow cars over there. And you take the ferry over, and then you have to, at least for my parents' cottage, they live way up at the top of the hill. So you have to get a horse-drawn carriage and bring all your stuff on this taxi, this horse-drawn taxi, and then get your stuff off the taxi and take it into the cottage and yada yada. So a trip that ultimately, like on land, on the map, should take about 3.5 hours, ends up taking about 5 or 6, depending on what happens along the way. So anyway, there was a lot of packing involved, and there was a lot of uncertainty of what are we going to need, what could we forget. What if this happens? What if that happens? And then on top of that, it was very windy the day that we were traveling. And I did have to drive across the Mackinac Bridge. For those of you who've ever crossed the Mackinac Bridge in high winds, know that if you're afraid of heights at all, that can be a very terrifying experience. So it's a windy day. And I woke up the morning that we were about to travel to Mackinac, and the thought popped in my head, what if the car goes off the bridge? What if we forget something that we really desperately need for work or school? What if the taxi isn't there when we get there? How are we going to stay warm? It's really cold up here. It's in the 30s, and with the wind, it felt like it was in the 20s or the teens. So all kinds of what if thoughts started popping into my head, and I started to feel more and more anxious about the trip. Then I decided to stop for a moment and take a breath. And I started to think about the times in my life when the worst case scenario actually did happen and what I did about it. And I realized that for all of the times that the worst case scenario happened, I actually dealt with it just fine. And I made it through, and I came up with solutions for myself. So I realized, wait a minute, in this moment, I'm not trusting myself by going through all of the what if scenarios. What I'm saying to myself is, you might not have the resources to get through this hardship or whatever obstacle comes your way. And I decided, I don't want to not trust myself. I think I'm pretty resourceful. I think I come up with some pretty good spur-of-the-moment solutions at times. And if I don't, I usually ask someone. There's usually someone around that I can ask, or I can make a phone call. So I also realized, what if there are other questions that I'm not asking? And this is when I started a new what if process. And that what if process is about thinking about all of the maybe not so negative or the neutral what ifs that could happen. So for example, in my Mackinac experience coming up here, one of the neutral what ifs was, what if everything goes just fine and nothing extraordinary happens? Okay. What if we get to the boat dock and there are lots of dock workers there to help us? What if we get to the taxi and there are some interesting people that we get to meet? So all of a sudden, I started coming up with these alternative what ifs, and it actually started to calm me down. It actually started to open me up to the possibility that there could be some really fun experiences along the way. So what did end up happening on our trip up? Well, a lot of unexpected things, of course. One of them was that it snowed the entire way. That was completely not even one of the what ifs that I came up with. And I handled it just fine by driving carefully. And we got to the bridge, and yes, it was very, very windy, and yes, my heart was beating very fast, but I also made it across, which made me feel like somewhat of a warrior of sorts. And we got to the boat dock just fine, dropped our luggage off. There was a dock worker who helped us. It was very, very windy, and it was very, very cold, and I was very, very thankful that I brought an extra blanket. So I could bundle up in that extra blanket, and we found a tarp to kind of stand behind. And yes, the boat ride was very rocky, and the doors kept swinging open every single time the boat would rock from side to side. But I managed to get to one of the doors and sit by it and keep it closed. And that put me in the position in front of a window where I could notice the light on the water. If I hadn't done that, I wouldn't have seen the light on the water. And yes, we did meet some very interesting people on the taxi ride up. We got to meet some new neighbors. And we made it to the cottage. We made it earlier to the cottage than I was expecting us to. So ultimately, there were some challenges along the way with the wind and the roads and all of that. But we made it just fine. We helped each other. And we have some pretty good stories to tell as a result of all of that. If I had gone down the road of all of the negative what ifs, my energy for this trip might have been completely depleted. And that's all I would have been looking for too. I would have been looking out for all of the bad things to happen. But instead, I started looking out for all of the maybe neutral things, or maybe some of the positive things that I wasn't expecting. Some of those small moments of enjoyment that I wasn't expecting. So that is the what if process, or maybe the alternative what if process, if you will. I hope that that is a process that you can use today and into the future. And I hope that it helps to not only help you feel calmer, but also more empowered, and to help you learn how to trust yourself a little bit more, and to know that you always have good solutions. You always have, and you always will. And in those moments when you feel completely stuck, there's probably going to be someone else there who can help you out. So I hope you enjoyed my little live video today. You can find me here on the Wings Unfolded Facebook page, also on my Instagram page, also on my LinkedIn page, and also on my YouTube channel. I hope you all have a fantastic day, and take care.